Coming up on this week's episode of TechSNAP, Microsoft's been breached, Google suffers a major outage, and finally we get some solid technical details on Target's massive credit card hack. Then it's a great big batch of your questions, a rockin' roundup, and much, much more on this week's episode of TechSNAP. Hi everyone, and welcome to TechSNAP. This is episode 147 of Jupiter Broadcasting's weekly Systems Network and Administration podcast. We stream this episode live on January 30th, 2014. This episode is brought to you by our two fine sponsors, GoDaddy and Ting. I'll tell you more about those sponsors as this here show goes on. And of course, our live stream is powered by the incredible Scale Engine over at scaleengine.com. You got to go check that out. My name is Chris, and joining us every single week is our host, the admin, the tech, and the teacher, Mr. Alan Jude. Hey there, Alan.
Hey, Chris, everybody. Thanks for watching.
Hey, Alan. So I want to say right up here at the top of the show, before we forget, next week we're doing a double-header TechSNAP. That always means usually we start 2 hours earlier on the live stream.
Yep.
So noon, 11 o'clock Pacific time, which is what? Your time?
2 p.m. Eastern.
Wow, you do it so much later? It's like afternoon over there. It's still morning for me.
Well, it's 4 o'clock now.
Yeah, that's crazy to my face.
Towards dinner time almost.
Yeah, after we finish, you go have dinner and I go have lunch.
Yeah.
So join us next week live over jblive.tv. You can always go to jupiterbroadcasting.com/calendar to get the latest times and dates. We always try to keep that updated. Plus, it also auto-converts to your local time, so you don't have to worry about that silly time zone math. And that also means we want extra amounts of your feedback. So email us, go to jupiterbroadcasting.com, pop the contact link, choose TechSNAP from the dropdown, and then fill it out with your IT-related questions, anything like that, hardware, security, deployment, infrastructure. Ask us. We're happy. ZFS, all that kind of stuff. We're happy to answer. And you can also just email us techsnap@jupiterbroadcasting.com or start a thread in our subreddit, links.techsnap.tv, and we'll try to get to those because we're going to be recording 2 episodes next week. So it's a great chance to get your question in. And we always need a little extra email to help fill out both episodes.
There's only so much news in a week, so yeah. And
plus, it's a great
emails are the best part of the show anyway.
I think so too. Yeah, it's a great chance to just answer a bunch of questions, and it's a good value for folks watching live. And Alan, why don't we start with a story that I only saw the headlines about this week, but I find it to be an interesting phenomenon where attackers have breached Microsoft in order to gain more information about what they're sharing with law enforcement. Is that basically what I have? Do I have that correct?
Yeah, it's pretty close. According to Microsoft, a number of employees were targeted with attacks aiming to compromise both their email and social media accounts, and in some cases, the attacks were successful. Right? We learned about the Syrian Electronic Army and other people doing that. It appears that the documents associated with law enforcement inquiries were stolen. So when police or law enforcement want information about
Microsoft customer.
PriceTX@hotmail.com.
Right.
They have to send a request to Microsoft. And Microsoft keeps all these requests in a big file or something. And the hackers managed to get in and steal that list of requests so they would know whose email is being monitored. In a more classic, intelligence operation like spying with countries, this type of information is extremely useful because it tells you which of your agents may have already been compromised, right? If the police are asking for information about somebody, that person's being looked at.
Good point.
Whereas if they're not being looked at, that nobody even knows they're there yet.
Yeah.
And that they're still good to go.
Yeah.
He continues, if we find that customer information related to these requests has been compromised, we will take appropriate action, which is probably to notify the customers. Out of regard for the privacy of our employees and customers, as well as sensitivity of law enforcement inquiries, we will not comment on the validity of any stolen emails or documents. So that means that if the hackers were to post these things online, Microsoft would not say whether they were real or not.
But does this also to you perhaps read a little bit as, well, since it doesn't apply to you, we're not going to tell you anything more than we have to because we don't want to? Doesn't it sound like it's almost like an excuse not to provide more details? And they'll probably go out of their way to make sure it doesn't apply to any customer.
But basically what they mean is if the details in those documents that were stolen contained all of somebody's private information, they would tell that person that information had been stolen.
Good.
Whereas in general, they don't tell the people that they're getting law enforcement requests about.
Right.
But if because of Microsoft's fault in this case, your private information was exposed because those documents were stolen, Microsoft would have to kind of navigate that thin line between, the secrecy of the law enforcement investigation and the legitimate privacy concerns of the Microsoft customer who was compromised.
That is an interesting conflict, whereas before they were required to keep it secret, now they also are up against this disclosure policy when customer information is compromised. That I didn't even think about.
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah. So, under the law enforcement stuff, they're not supposed to tell people when there's a subpoena for their information or whatever. But when that subpoena, say, includes the person's name, address, birth date, and other information, to uniquely identify them so they get the right Hotmail account or whatever.
Yeah.
Then if that information is out, they have a duty to tell that person.
Right.
And, they don't have to tell them that information came from a law enforcement request, but it's an interesting line they have to walk. The attackers have conducted their offensive against both email and social media accounts of Microsoft employees. The company did not reveal how many documents might have been exposed, nor the nature of the attack, how they actually got in. Although it sounds like some pretty simple password guessing from some of the tweets we saw.
Yeah. Yeah, it sounds like essentially phishing, right, through email and tweets.
Yeah, well, it's this Syrian Electronic Army's whole manifesto. Like we've seen from the postmortems done by The Onion and the Financial Times and other people that every time it's been the same. Send blanket phishing attack, then compromise one person inside the company, then use them to send a much better phishing attack to everybody that's not in the IT department.
Right.
Until you get someone whose account is valuable, and then go from there.
When it's against like the Financial Times, like I don't expect their employees to necessarily be savvy, but when it's against Microsoft, maybe the bar's a little higher there. You would think maybe they'd have a higher resistance to social engineering, since on whole it's a technical crowd in general. And now, yet it would seem that didn't really matter. And I suppose when you have 50,000 employees,
the guy who runs the Twitter account for Microsoft, not really that high value of
yeah, and like
it's practically an intern position.
Yeah, it's true.
An interesting thing to know would be how many of these law enforcement requests there were, and then how many of those might have been stolen.
Yeah.
Yeah,
they've given rough numbers, but
okay. Well, it's just it's their transparency report. You have that down here. Yeah. I'll get to it in just a sec. So what's interesting about this incident was this: if it was significant enough to disclose what happened, indicates that a fair number of documents could have been exposed, or that the company fears some of these documents will make their way into the public and have consequences. Right,
because I suppose this kind of thing happens frequently enough. I mean, that kind of implies that it happens enough where they don't even say anything most of the time. And this was kind of, the article knows this is kind of an interesting one-off because it appears to have been large enough to warrant disclosure.
Partly, but they had to say something when the blog got attacked, the Xbox Live service, their Twitter accounts.
Right.
It was pretty public that they were getting owned repeatedly.
Yeah,
like it
was
almost like once a day for a week by the Syrian Electronic Army.
Yeah, that's true. Everybody saw.
And so, according to Microsoft, the Syrian Electronic Army may have been the ones that stole these documents, or it might have been someone else who just happened to be attacking them at the same time. They are Microsoft, after all.
Yeah.
Lots of people attacking them all the time.
Yeah.
Our current information suggests phishing attacks are related to the attack. It's like, well, duh.
Yeah.
It's like the Syrian Electronic Army has been doing this for quite a while. They've gotten quite good at it.
Yeah.
And it's just sad because, when The Onion posted exactly the phishing emails they got, they weren't good enough to trick any competent person.
People are just like on autopilot or something, just trying to rush through their day.
No, it's just people that just don't even know how to use email by the sounds of it. Or, what actually makes up an HTTP and so on.
Yeah. Well, that's what I thought was interesting. I mean, it is Microsoft employees, but yeah, you can't, I guess you just can't know.
Yeah. So in March 2013, Microsoft released its first transparency report, noting that it had received over 70,000 law enforcement requests in 2012. Essentially, I wonder what that proportion is compared to other providers. Like, it just seems that more people that would be doing computer-related stuff would probably have a Gmail than a Hotmail. Like, I know Hotmail used to be big with the hackers you would hear about, mostly because it was the guys that got caught that would use Hotmail, right? The guys who would, have a silly long username at Hotmail.
Right.
And so on. But
yeah. Interesting to see, the Syrian Electronic Army, if it is them, which there is actually, it almost feels like speculation on their part. It doesn't actually seem like they've officially tracked it back to the Syrian Electronic Army.
Right. They say they suspect, but they definitely do not know.
Kind of like the new boogeyman. It's like the Al Qaeda of cyber attacks in a way. I'm not saying it's not them, and it does kind of fit their previous MOs. It seems like it's their general approach. But all right, Alan, any other thoughts on that story?
There's just a couple of extra notes here. The securityaffairs.co has a article titled "Spear Phishing Against Microsoft and Exposing Law Enforcement Inquiries." And Tripwire also has that Microsoft believes law enforcement documents compromised by hack. And, this was pretty big in the news, so it's all over the place.
Yeah, lots of additional coverage.
The Verge, Ars Technica, SC Magazine, et cetera, et cetera.
All right, well, why don't I just take a quick break right here and thank GoDaddy.com, one of the sponsors of the TechSNAP program. GoDaddy loves the Super Bowl. I'm going to tell you more about that here in just a second. But first, let me tell you a little bit about GoDaddy. We have a special offer for you to celebrate that Super Bowl. Use the promo code GO32 off 3 when you check out, and you'll get 32% off any. That's right, 32% off anything in your shopping cart that's new. So this is a great way to get a few domains, some hosting, maybe a cert. They have hosted Office 365. If you're in a workplace that has been considering using Office 365, they have a deal that's better than anywhere else you can get. Plus, that 32% off code applies to that. They have a brand new WordPress hosting engine you can check out, and again, our code applies to that. But like I mentioned, GoDaddy does love the Super Bowl, and I think they're changing it up this year. They always have commercials for the Super Bowl. That's sort of a tradition over at GoDaddy. But check out this new commercial, Alan, and tell me what you think.
Let's talk about dreams and the people who choose to pursue them.
Like she's a real person
With a real dream.
of starting her very own business.
And she's got a message for her boss in front of 100 million people.
So they're going to have somebody quit their job during their Super Bowl commercial. That's crazy, right? That's going to be that's a whole new way to do it, and that actually sounds really interesting. So we're going to find out who this new person is during the Super Bowl, and I'll tell you, I'll be watching. I think that's going to be a new interesting take on the Super Bowl commercial, and it's leaving me kind of in suspense. So go over to GoDaddy.com, the world's #1 domain name registrar. Go get yourself a .com. Go get yourself a .tv, a .am, whatever you want. And just use the promo code GO32 off 3. That's all one word, GO32 off 3 when you check out, and you'll take 32% off, and you can celebrate the Super Bowl even if you're not a sports ball fan like Alan, although I'm pretty stoked myself. Thank you to GoDaddy for sponsoring the TechSNAP program. I think that's really clever, the way that they so you didn't get to see the video feed, Alan, but they zoom in on a picture of the person who's going to quit, and in the picture frame they just have a big question mark, like totally, and they bleep out her name. It's a total tease. Makes me want to know even more. All right, Alan. Well, our next story comes right from Krebs on Security, a favorite resource here of this show, and we've finally gotten some real meat and potatoes details on this Target breach that we've been talking about now since before Christmas, really, right?
Yep. I mean, yeah, it was since it came out just after American Thanksgiving. Yeah,
I thought so. But finally, now here we are in January. We actually have an idea of what happened and what software was exploited. So where do we start, sir?
Yes. So Krebs' article here says an examination of the malware used in the Target breach suggests that the attackers may have had help from a poorly secured feature built into the widely used IT management software. As we previously noted, the attackers used malware on the point of sales machines to send credit card data from memory to a central control server on the Target internal network, which they called the dump server. Do you have the graphic up? And then from that dump server, then they moved it to an exfiltration server, which is a server that had access to the internet, because the server they dumped all the data on didn't, because they have separation, right? So only let machines that actually need to go out to the internet, so the machines that shouldn't be on the internet can't be on the internet.
Yeah.
But when they're all on the same LAN and they don't have the separation there, then you just dump it all on the server that can talk to the POS machines, and then move it from that, island hop from that machine to a machine that can get to the internet, and then exfiltrate it out to your stolen servers in Russia.
Boom, boom.
But as we learned originally, the user account best1_user with the password backup $U$R was used to log into a shared drive. In this case, it was letter S, but it's Windows. You can map whatever drive you want.
Yeah.
And that username is the same one that gets installed automatically by an IT management software suite called Performance Assurance for Microsoft Servers. This product, according to its maker, which is based in Texas, called BMC Software, includes administrator-level user account called best1_user.
That's pretty cool.
So BMC explains that the best1_user account is installed by their software to do routine tasks. Article states that while the best1 account is essentially a system or administrator level account on the host machine, it's not in any groups like administrator or users, so it shouldn't even be able to log into a machine.
Right. I mean, it's kind of like when you the equivalent would be to give on a Unix equivalent would be a root user without a valid shell account, so they can't log into the shell. But
I don't know that it was quite the same as
it's
a
supposed
root.
to be like they call it
not a second account with UID 0, but yeah,
right.
It's
They call it a
account.
non-interactive account is the idea.
Yeah, a service account.
Yeah, and
it's only been it's the account you create over the side to run a cron script.
But we have seen exploits in the past where you have these service accounts that end up getting full login access to start applications.
Especially when rather than having say a random password for each one, there's the same password for every copy of that software on every machine that software is installed on.
And this plague. So in the Unix land, you could do
Go ahead.
Well, in the Unix land, you could do SSH keys, right? So you could have something log in and passwords wouldn't have to be involved and things like that. But in the Windows land, these management softwares very frequently rely on these domain-wide accounts that it's the same. It's because it's a domain account. It's the same authentication on every single computer, and that's the only way for these systems to go in and pull down the information they need, and they have to have administrative level access to get the info from this, like read the event log and things like that. So it's sort of a requirement. They're kind of damned if they do, damned if they don't. You can't, in other words, you can't have these systems function without an account system like this. So tons of systems use this. It's not just BMC, a lot of them.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned Unix and using SSH keys, but it's still not really the right way to do it. If the vendor has this one SSH private key and they put the public key for that on every machine that has it, all someone needs is that one key, and they've now compromised every machine.
Very true.
You should definitely have multiple keys and rotate them and stuff rather than just having that fixed. So, yeah. So, bad practice. It doesn't necessarily mean that every machine with this software installed is vulnerable. It may have been some other misconfiguration or some other exploit that allowed them to do it, to be able to add that user to a group that made them able to access that share or something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, also, Dell SecureWorks issued a paper out. They did an analysis on this to people who have the BMC software and said, hey, you might want to be aware of this. BMC responded and said, well, they're just trying to leverage the legitimacy of our brand and blah, 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 blah. It's not. Yes,
Dell SecureWorks is just trying to piggyback on the fact that everybody knows BMC software is good.
Yeah. So this is an interesting thing here where you've got a pretty specific attack at this point. So you get in there, you're going specifically after an individual username and password for a specific IT management software. Now, it's not the most unknown software, so it's not that uncommon, but it still seems a little specific to me.
I don't know their sales numbers or something, but it may be the kind of thing that you could assume almost any large corporation in the States would have installed on their Windows
I actually found a list of customers, and I added it to the notes in a little bit, so I won't jump ahead. But yeah, I'll let you continue.
Yeah. So, it might be that it was just a common vector
enough.
that was there.
Yeah.
But yeah, so Dell SecureWorks came up with the thing, and they're basically providing some best practices and stuff for anyone that might have this software to make sure that they're not the next victim. And then BMC, tries to spin that to make it not look like any of this might have been their fault or something. But anyway. So according to SecureWorks, one component of the malware itself installed a service called BladeLogic, a service name no doubt inspired to mimic BMC's product, which is called BMC BladeLogic Automation Suite.
Definitely.
So they were, disguising it so it wouldn't stand out.
So if you're looking at the list of services, it looks legit.
Right, except for, it just says BladeLogic instead of the longer BMC BladeLogic Automation Suite. But, it's almost social engineering, right? By giving it a name that looks close enough, that contains enough of the right buzzwords, that it'll just get skipped over when you're scanning for things that don't belong.
Yep, I totally agree. That's what they're doing.
According to sources trusted by Krebs, using mostly open source data to keep tabs on the software and hardware used at various retail environments. BMC software is in use at many major retail and grocery chains across the country, including Kroger, Safeway, Home Depot, Sam's Club, and the Vons companies, along many, many others. Initial entry into the network is suspected to have been facilitated by an SQL injection attack. So, they think that originally they broke into the target website by SQL injection and then went on from there and eventually got into the internal network.
Island hopped.
Yeah, if that's true, then it really means that Target should have done a better job isolating their web servers from the point of sale system. There should be no way to get from A to B there. But,
and a SQL injection attack is such a low-hanging fruit attack, too. It's unfortunate that
now,
they
there's no proof that was actually what happened.
Right,
this is just speculation by Malcovery, which is a company that sponsors Krebs' blog. And I don't know. I have trouble taking them seriously because of their name.
Malcovery?
They seem to do decent research, but I just can't take them seriously because of their name.
Yeah, the only reason I even really follow them is because Krebs seems to respect them, and he lets them sponsor, so...
Yeah. And I've seen some of the research, and it looked good. It's just the name just doesn't work
Some
for
marketing
me.
person picked that, I guess. I don't know, because, Malcovery is...
Yeah, that's just...
Yeah.
It's just icky.
It's like using the word cyber.
Almost. Anyway, we also have a link here. So Krebs contacted BMC and couldn't get them to say much, but the Star Tribune newspaper got some actual quotes from them. So I have a link to their article there. And BMC says that it's working with McAfee to investigate and make sure that they weren't the cause of the problem.
As long as Intel Security's on the job, then we have nothing to worry about.
And then via Twitter, Krebs was originally the Wall Street Journal did a post about vendor credentials being used in the attack against Target. And Krebs was like, it looks like you just took my article and redrafted it.
Yeah.
And they're like, actually, sorry, that's a coincidence. We're talking about a different vendor. So they claim that there may have been another vendor involved. And it's not clear exactly what's going on there yet. Although it could possibly just be that it was the vendor that sold Target the BMC software. Right? Then we could have been a middleman
wouldn't that be interesting?
Yeah, but we don't know all the details yet. But that's the problem with vague statements and then filter through news services, right?
Yeah.
That's why I much prefer to get my news from Krebs, because I know he's very good about not rewording what other people said so that you know what, the typical information flow for some of this cybersecurity stuff tends to be the system administrators and or the security researchers that were working for Target or whatever, then goes through Target PR, which changes the wording, which could accidentally change the meaning because the PR person doesn't actually know what any of this stuff is. Then it goes into the NBC News or the Wall Street Journal or whatever, and they change the meaning a little bit more as they reword it, and then it comes out. Yeah. Whereas with Krebs, he was talking directly to his inside people that he knows.
Even on top of that, you'll have say it actually goes to somebody like the New York Times. Then you have 30 sub-publications like The Verge and Ars Technica that then also rewrite it in their spin.
Are writing it based on their interpretation. And, we actually saw, we had an incident, we almost did misreporting on something on BSD Now because of that. Two different people read the same paragraph in the quarterly status report, and one of them comes away saying that Jordan Hubbard is now part of the core team when it was just that he got his source commit bit back, which isn't the same thing. They said, well, the core team welcomes him back to being a source committer, not to being on the core team, right? And it's very easy for two different people to read the same paragraph of text and come out with a different interpretation of what it actually means. And so that, And that's why we try to filter this stuff down for you, and why we also provide links to multiple sources so you can try to get the common truth out of it and so on.
It also looks like, so now we have the Secret Service is involved with this investigation and the FBI is involved with this investigation. And the FBI apparently sees this as a larger trend against point-of-sale systems and is now sort of investigating this as a greater trend.
Well, and they put out a big warning about it, and so did U.S. CERT. But part of it was... I had a point.
About the Secret Service?
Oh, no, the FBI. When we heard originally, there were like 5 other stores that might have been compromised at the same time as Target that we just haven't heard about yet.
Yeah, yeah.
And so that would suggest why the FBI thinks that it might have been a bigger trend. Because we learned from Krebs that Michael's, the art supply store,
Right.
Was
meant to put that in the roundup. Yeah, the credit card information, which my wife shops at all the time. Not all the time, but about once a month she goes down there to an event. And, that's credit card on file every time she goes. Yeah. Now, I look at this and I think, didn't we just have a conversation last week about how they redacted the username that was used in the malware? Didn't we just talk about that last week? And now here it is. It's like it's out.
No, it was Krebs had it 2 weeks before we talked about the redaction. The reaction was mostly removing IP addresses and usernames and stuff.
Okay.
Part of it was because if Kroger and Safeway have the same software and that password lets you into it, then having everybody know that might not be a good one, right?
Kroger, Safeway, Home Depot, Sam's Club, the Vons companies, among many others, apparently all use this software.
Yep.
So this.
Although we don't know for sure whether that's actually, if just having that installed is enough to make you compromise. It might have been that somebody accidentally modified something they shouldn't have.
Yeah, maybe in group policy they maybe didn't have it set correctly for service accounts or something like that. But I think if you zoom out and look at it from the bigger picture, one of the things that is very common for a compromise is these types of systems are a great path in because they usually have exceptions in firewall rules. If you have a multi-subnetted LAN or maybe a DMZ, you usually have an exception to allow the machine in. And a lot of times, like in this case, they have to have some sort of administrative level access. So if you can ride along with that, then you get administrative level access to the machine. So it's really challenging, I think especially more so in the Windows environment, to have a centralized system like this that has extreme privileges on your network and not have it be essentially the golden ticket for an attacker. Like, what can people do there, Alan?
Sorry, what was the question?
Well, what do you do? So you use, for example, you have Nagios, right, that watches the Scale Engine network. What steps have you taken so that way if somebody compromises your Nagios server, they don't essentially get direct access to all of the machines it's monitoring? Like with
none of our Nagios can actually log into any of our servers. Most of our monitoring is like SNMP and stuff, which is restricted by IP address. So you would be able to read SNMP, but it's read only. So most of the stats we're monitoring is just reading stuff from the other server. So it wouldn't actually give you much as far as access to anything.
Yeah.
And then most of the more sensitive stuff, we long ago switched from pulling stuff over SSH to pushing stuff with Nagios passive. So the servers just collect data locally and then push it into Nagios.
So you have that would work for you if SNMP works and things like that. It seems like sometimes companies, when they get big enough, like somebody like the size of Target, they want more automation out of that system. They want to be able to do more things from that system, and then that sort of changes your requirements and exposes you to these types of things.
Yeah. It can be a problem with having single sign-on and things like that, right? If that one administrator account in the global admin group or whatever in your Active Directory gets compromised, that's every server everywhere.
Interesting stuff. Again, we have an update from BMC linked in the show notes. Krebs' comment about the Wall Street Journal and additional coverage from Ars Technica all listed out. This is, this fits in exactly with what I would expect when I hear these details. So it doesn't surprise me too much. So just a quick recap. Remember, we had malware installed on the point of sales machines. Those scraped credit card information right from memory, reported it back to a central control server over a Windows share, and then uploaded that up to the internet to the Russian stolen servers.
You saw the diagram, right? We went from the POS machines with the malware that we know about. Remember, that's the one that got uploaded to ThreatPost, and I think it's back public there again. And then all that data got moved from those POS servers to a server called the dump server, which was on the network that the POS servers could reach. Then they hopped from that server to the exfiltration server, which is one that had access to the internet because the dump server did not. And then once they had the data on a machine at Target that had the internet, then they could post it to their server in Russia.
Craziness. Total craziness. Interesting. All right, Alan, any other thoughts on that story?
No, that's about it.
All right, well, then I'll take a second here to thank Ting.com, sponsor of the TechSNAP program. Ting is mobile that makes sense. My mobile service provider. I've got the Nexus 5 and the HTC One on the Ting network. And there's rumors, Alan, that the Nexus line of phones may be coming to a close from Google. Yes.
Oh.
So I don't know, maybe not, but if it is, I would be very happy to. I would hold on to this Nexus phone for a long time, and that's one of the great things about Ting.
I've had my Nexus S for ages, and it's like I'm thinking about getting a 5 just because this one's kind of showing its age.
If there's an Android phone that you want to hang on to for a long time and not end up disappointed, the Nexus lines are great. The other top tier phones are good too, like the HTC One and the Samsung lines. Usually all now they've all got that worked out. But the great thing about the Nexus line is that Google experience, and you can buy it directly from the Google Play Store, and then go order your Ting SIM card, and boom, Bob's your uncle. You're now using the Nexus 5, which you own outright on the Ting network. So let me tell you a little bit about Ting. Ting has no contracts and no early termination fees, no bundling or ride-along services, no overage charges or penalties, because you only pay for what you use. It's $6 a month. $6 a month for a line. $6. That's it. And you just pay for what you use. On top of that, you get voicemail, caller ID, tethering, and hotspot, all included. Three-way calling, of course, also included. No mysterious line items on your bill. No, sir. No, sir. You can have unlimited devices, all pooled. And, of course, you can always get a hold of Ting at 1-855-TING-FTW. And a real Canadian will answer the phone when you call in to help answer your problem. So you can go find out more about how Ting charges. They just take your minutes, your megabytes, and your messages. They add them all up at the end of the month. Whatever bucket you fall into, that's what you end up paying. They have an awesome dashboard that lets you track where you're at, including a great app on your Ting device, which syncs up perfectly with the dashboard. You also have other really cool power functions in the dashboard, like setting up your call forwarding, your voicemail stuff, activating, deactivating lines, all that, transferring devices, all that kind of stuff. It was really cool. When I gave my Note 2 to Matt, he was able to just log right into Ting and activate it. I have activated 4 devices on the Ting network. I've never had to call a Ting rep once. It's great to know that if I ever had a problem, I could just get a hold of somebody right away, but I've never needed to. I've been able to do everything through their website, and this is, it's wrapping up right now. So if you're watching this live, or if you're catching this Thursday that this show went out, tomorrow, Ting is doing an LG G2 giveaway. LG G2 is the new hotness, a 32 gigabyte edition. And here's what you have to do. You become a Ting subscriber on the YouTube channel. So you need to be a Ting subscriber. Go to their YouTube channel, and we have you can go to ting.com/blog to get the details. You become a subscriber. Leave a comment on their unboxing video of the G2, and then you will be entered into the drawing. They have a cool,
Jesse from Ting here. We're giving away an LG G2 on Friday, January 31st. For more information on how to win this powerhouse tri-band LTE device, stay tuned to the end of this video.
So they have an awesome unboxing, and man, it makes me so jealous. I want a G2, and I already have a good phone.
Make sure that you're a Ting subscriber and leave a comment on this video telling us why the LG G2 should be yours. So that's all you have to do. Thanks so much for watching this unboxing, guys. I'm Jesse. Make sure to subscribe to our channel and stay tuned for more unboxings, giveaways, and more. What we're starting to do now is for every unboxing that we have, we're going to try and give away that device along with the videos. So stay tuned. There's going to be some awesome videos coming up. Lots more content coming your way.
Isn't that cool? And you can find out more by going over to ting.com/blog. Look, here's how you get started if you're ready to actually take control of your mobile service and no longer be the victim of these large telco companies that are honestly, at this point, it's a duopoly, and they're abusing that duopoly. Ting's changing up. They're cleaning up the wireless industry. So go to techsnap.ting.com. That's going to take $25 off your first month of service if you bring a phone. If you don't already have a phone, good news. You can take that discount and apply it to your first device by going to techsnap.ting.com. $25 off. Not bad. Then you own that device outright, and you can keep using it for as long as you want because there's no contract, no early termination fee, and you only pay for what you use. And if you're in a contract right now, my friends, go to ting.com/ETF, and they'll give you more information about how they're going to relieve a little bit of that sting when you have to cancel that early termination fee. So like say you have a couple of lines you have to cancel. If you go to ting.com/ETF, you grab your Ting device, you port your numbers over, and then submit your ETF claim, and they're going to pay up to $75 per line that you had to get canceled. That's right, because Ting knows that ETFs suck, and they want to help you get out of them. So go to techsnap.ting.com, and a big thank you to Ting for sponsoring the TechSNAP program.
I wish it was possible for them to be in Canada.
I think they're working on it.
Yes, because in Canada recently we passed a law about early termination fees, stating that it can't be more than your outstanding device balance on the phone if you had a contract
See,
with the phone.
that makes a lot more
So
sense.
they can't just charge you $400 early termination for no reason, like some places in Canada were trying to do.
Well, see, here in the U.S., we just let our telcos run wild. We let them destroy internet freedom.
we have the same problem. We just recently passed a law saying that they can't do a contract longer than 2 years,
man.
and that the early termination fee can't be more than just what you owe on the device they subsidize for you.
See, this is why everybody's got to go to TechSNAP.ting.com right here, so we can apply pressure to make market forces force these guys to change. That's the only way to do it. It's money talks. Vote with your wallet. Yep. TechSNAP.ting.com. Okay, Alan. So this actually bit me pretty hard. Gmail and Google Docs and G+, they all went down this last week. Like all of them.
When was this? I was like asleep or something. I didn't even notice.
It started like at 10 o'clock my time. I was in the middle of like an active email thread, and I was like, what? Oh.
Which day of the week was it?
I think it was a Friday. I think. Can't remember. Maybe. All my days run together. But yeah. I do know that like I had written up this monster of an email. Click send. You got an error message. Page cannot be displayed. Lost the email.
Oh, I hate that.
Yeah. So what is going on with Google, Alan?
Yeah, so it turns out at 10:55 Pacific time on whatever morning you said it was, the internal system that generates configuration files, essentially information that tells the system how to behave, at Google encountered a software bug and generated an incorrect configuration and pushed it out to all Google servers.
So the automated configuration generation system automatically built the wrong config and then automatically
Well, there was a
deployed
bug in it somewhere, and it pushed a config that didn't make any sense. This invalid configuration was sent to live services over the course of the next 15 minutes because they have this gradual rollout system, which caused users' requests for their data to be ignored, and in some services in general to just throw errors all over the place.
Twitter was blowing up too, like Gmail is down.
Yeah. So about 7 minutes later, users began seeing these errors affecting their services. And at that time, their internal monitoring system alerted the Google site reliability team, which just so happened to be trying to
do a
Reddit Ask Me Anything at the same time.
That's embarrassing.
Yeah. So over the course of the next 12 minutes, the engineers were trying to debug what was happening. When that same configuration deployment system, having automatically cleared the original error that generated the invalid config, it rebooted, started up, and tried. It generated new correct configuration at 11:14 a.m. and started sending that out.
So Skynet fixed itself.
Yeah, and then over the course of the next 15 minutes, by 11:30, everything was back to normal.
That's funny.
So it's it's something like Puppet or whatever, and there was a bug in it threw a bad manifest, and then when it tried again,
I think I'm calling BS on that 15-minute figure because I think, if I recall correctly, I waited about 15 minutes and then I said screw it and I just picked up the phone and I called the person who I was emailing and we were on the phone for about...
The total downtime here would have been about 35 minutes.
Oh, okay. All right. Yeah, I was going to say that sounds about right.
It's just so it broke, and then over the course of the next 15 minutes everything went down. And then 20 minutes later it fixed itself and started, and over the course of the next 15 minutes, everything came back up.
What are the chances that it happens while the reliability team is doing an AMA, kind of like showing off on Reddit?
Yeah.
Like, crazy.
Ask us how we keep Google stuff up.
Well, it's down.
It's like, oh, we don't.
And apparently they don't. Apparently it's this automated system that keeps things running.
Well, the automated system writes the configs, but it's their job to, well, as the reliability engineers, most of them probably aren't the guys that wrote the code for the config system, but they write the configs for the config system.
Yeah.
Which can be a bit of a challenge as the guy who writes the configs for the config system over here at Scale-Engine.
Yeah, yeah. Lesson learned here is if Scale-Engine ever has an outage, you just blame it on Puppet.
Sure. Yeah, we had that a week ago. I was pushing out the new Fast CGI thing, and accidentally pushed this one user account to every machine, and I didn't want it there. So then I pushed the thing to delete it from every machine, and I forgot that there was a user with the same name on the old legacy server.
Oh.
And then Apache wouldn't restart because the user was missing. And so that only affected like really old legacy customers that are still on this old server we had years before I even started Scale Engine. And it's the only server we have that still runs Apache.
So yeah, it makes sense. You might forget about that one.
Yeah. But Puppet did break some stuff there.
That happens. That happens. Well, all right, Alan, any other thoughts on that story?
No, it's just it's pretty interesting. And you can, the Reddit Ask Me Anything has answers to questions people ask not related to this and related to this.
Yeah.
That might be of interest. And we have additional coverage from Reuters, TechCrunch, and Fox News.
Yeah, it was a big story. It was a big story. All right, well, I want to just mention that we have officially sent out all of the faux show stickers, and we'll have on the 15th of February, and Alan got his. Yours is hard to see because it's white on white.
Yep.
But that's the one I'm going to be putting on my Bonobo, too. I think that's going to be a good one. Look at this, Alan. 43 U.S. states, 32 different countries the stickers went out to. And it's interesting, on a small scale, this sort of represents our audience map, too. So that's cool. Yep. It would make sense. So we'll be having a faux show sticker award show on February 15th. And by the way, if you got your shirt, don't forget to send it in to Angela at JupiterBroadcasting.com. We're posting them all up at Instagram.com/JupiterBroadcasting. We've sold well over 1,000 shirts. We've gotten about 76 pictures back, which is about expected.
Come on, people. Pictures.
This is your last chance to get them in if you want. And also your sticker picture. So send that to Angela at JupiterBroadcasting.com.
Yes, when you signed up for a sticker, you agreed that you would send a picture. It was a contract.
Contract, yeah. We're going to come down and we'll get you for it. No, that sticker was a binding agreement. So it's pretty cool to see this map, though. So we'll have that linked in the show notes if you guys want to see that.
It'd be interesting to figure out which of the states weren't included. Like, I can imagine Alaska and Hawaii or whatever. And I noticed it was like, the plain states where there's no people. So that kind of makes sense. But it seems there are a couple other states that might have been conspicuously absent.
Yeah, I don't see Alaska in there. But I know I've heard from people from Alaska. Well, there you go. How does that make sense? That does not compute, but it's pretty cool to see it nonetheless. And you'll see more coverage about it soon.
But speaking of 1,000 T-shirts and only 77 pictures or whatever, I got my FreeBSD pillow in the mail today.
Oh, awesome! That is amazing, Alan.
Handmade.
That is so. Is every bit stitched? Is that what it is?
Yes. Yeah. It's like. I don't know if you can see the.
That's too cool to sleep on. Oh yeah.
Yeah. No, this will go on my couch in my living room.
Yeah, there you go.
It'll make it my house into, it'll be mine.
Is the back red? What's the back there?
Yeah, the back is just red.
Oh, cool. That is, and you're going to be giving one of those away on BSD Now.
Yes, we're giving one away in exchange for people submitting tutorials, and we've gotten like 3 or 4 tutorials. It's like we need more. Come on.
Yeah, so people go to bsdnow. Was it bsdnow.tv/contest? That's easy enough to remember. You think I would have?
Yeah.
That now that people have seen that, now they might.
We're picking the winner next week. So like this weekend, write a tutorial and send it in.
Yeah, sounds like you have a pretty good chance of winning if you do.
And you have a really good chance of winning. So please send us your tutorials
for the geekiest pillow cover ever.
Yes,
I've never seen it. You can't beat that. That's the FreeBSD boot screen. How are you going to beat that?
Exactly.
It's ASCII art on a pillow. You can't beat that.
Exactly.
Very cool. All right, Alan, was there anything else we want to cover in the news segment?
No, I think that's about it.
All right, then. That means it's time for the TechSNAP feedback. Thanks for sending your feedback to TechSNAP at JupiterBroadcasting.com or popping that contact link at the top of the Jupiter Broadcasting website, or even better, starting a thread in our subreddit over at links.techsnap.tv. And Alan, our first email this week comes from a longtime IRC member, Soapy, and he writes in with a few questions about RAID Z. He says a lot of information has been tossed around on the FreeNAS subreddit recently, and people are being told that RAID Z is bad. To always use RAID Z2 or better. I'm also being, he says also it's being used as a cause to lost hard drives or pools. He says he's worried about a URE error, Alan. A URE.
It's an unrecoverable read error.
Yeah. He says he's worried that an unrecoverable read error could happen on a healthy pool and then degrade it. Should I avoid RAID Z forever is his question.
It depends how important your data is and stuff. So with a typical RAID 5, right, if one of your drives has this error and it can't read that sector or whatever, the RAID array will try to rebuild. And if a second drive has error at the same time, then you've lost 2 drives in your RAID 5, and that takes out the array.
Right.
The other problem is if you have silent corruption in RAID 5 doesn't know that happened because it doesn't get an error from the drive. It just gets the wrong data, and then it corrupts your problem. So with ZFS, there's a couple of advantages. First of all, because it's doing checksumming, if there's a flip bit or something on one of the drives, it can recover that because it has the redundancy. And because it has the checksums, it'll know which one of the 2 copies is the right one, right? Was it the original copy that went bad, or is it the redundant copy that went bad? And the checksum will tell it which one of those is right so that it can recover it.
Yeah.
The other big thing that is a difference between, say, RAID 5 and RAID Z is with RAID Z, ZFS is the volume manager in the RAID, but also the file system.
Right.
So if there's an unrecoverable read error in, say, one sector, and somehow that gets completely lost and it can't be recovered from the redundancy because there's a second one or something, ZFS will just be like, okay, we lost that sector, so this file is now unreadable. But everything else in your array is fine. Right? So ZFS will just be like, we don't have enough redundancy to cover this error, so this file is screwed.
But not everything else.
But everything else is still working.
Yeah.
In general, you have less safety in RAID Z than you have in RAID Z2. So if you can afford it, do RAID Z2. All of my arrays are RAID Z2 now. I don't have any Z1s.
Were you nervous?
More about 2 drives failing at once than an unrecoverable read error.
Yeah.
It depends what you're doing, though. We have a thing in the feedback about how to research and pick a drive for your workload, and it gets into this a little more detail.
Okay.
But, the chance of an unrecoverable read error on most drives, like the cheap desktop drives, is 10 to the power of 14, which works out to something like every time you read 12.5 petabytes or something. So then if you factor out how much reading and writing you're going to do to the drive and find out how soon that's going to be for you, right? How many terabytes are you going to push? Are you ever going to write 12 terabytes to the drive? If not, then it's not that as big a concern. And, some manufacturers now actually have more detail about like how much workload the drive is meant to support, where, I think some of the drives is only meant to handle like 55 terabytes a year of writing. In order to maintain that mean time between failure that they guarantee, that the drive will last so many years.
Right.
And so if you're writing 4 times that, you can expect the drive not to last the same amount of time as it says on the box.
Oh, that's true.
Because you're using it 4 times as much as what it was designed for.
Right.
And so, you can maybe decide that, maybe it makes sense to pay more money for the SAS drive, or, the
Enterprise.
So the desktop drives are 10 to the 14th. Whereas the nearline SATA, like enterprise SATA drives are 10 to the 15, and the fancy SAS drives are 10 to the 16. Each of those being 10 times 10 times less chance that the bad stuff will happen.
Okay. Well,
but like they say, that's the probability that it'll happen.
But it does sound like it's
it can
good
still
to
happen at any time.
But to answer the core question, it does sound like it's if you can afford it. The answer is if you can afford to spend the money on the drives, go to RAID Z2.
Yes, and also that RAID is not backups. You should still have backups, and then if your RAID Z goes bad, you just have to restore from the backup.
Nailed it. Yeah,
right?
Totally. Yeah, exactly.
So
that's a very important point.
Maybe it makes more sense in certain situations to just use RAID Z
and spend the money on
the backup.
Yeah,
because RAID Z2 makes it more resilient while it's online, but you still need backup. Well, and things can still go wrong.
RAID doesn't protect you from users or administrators deleting the data or something getting corrupt. I mean, there could be, you could have an Excel spreadsheet that gets corrupted and then it doesn't matter if it's on a RAID.
Yeah, that could be just because Microsoft Excel crashed while it was saving the file.
Yeah, I've seen that happen for sure, especially over network drives.
Yeah, or especially with very large files. Microsoft Office was notorious for corrupting stuff on very large files.
Yeah, especially back in the day.
Yeah.
All right, well, Kenny writes in. I don't know if we're going to be able to help him, but we'll give it a go. He says, hey, I acquired an unwanted Dell PowerEdge server from my work and loaded Ubuntu 13.10 onto it. It seems to work. It's certainly completely operational when it was retired 2 years ago. He has the full specs attached, but I summarize them below. He says, is a product of this vintage worth reusing, or is it only fit for the bin? Are there any other uses it could be put to if it's no longer suitable for its original purpose? He says, and keep the xenophobic responses for all us non-Americans, Alan. After all, it makes sense that it's when it all is said and done. He says he loves the shows, and TechSNAP makes his head hurt a good deal of the time. No pain, no gain, though. Okay, here's the specs. It's a PowerEdge 1800. It has one 3.2 gigahertz Xeon processor.
Like a Nacona.
Yeah.
Like back when Xeons didn't have any differentiators. Except for the clock speed.
Two 80 gigabyte, 7200 RPM drives, Maxter Sabre editions, and one tape backup unit. It's an 80, 160 gig internal Value Smart 160. Pretty low end.
The hard drives, I wouldn't trust. Just the fact that the manufacturer date on that machine was 2006, so it's 2014. So you're looking at 8 and 9 years old.
It's probably loud.
I wouldn't trust those hard drives. That processor is going to be sucking up power at a rate that's just ungodly. So possibly useful. This
is a hard thing to find.
It's old enough that I don't even know if you'd be able to boot it off USB sticks or something.
That's
and
true.
if it did, it would be like USB 1.
It's old enough that it has a floppy drive. That's how old this thing is.
There is it, yeah. So, I've used machines like this for like pfSense and stuff before because it's got a good network card or whatever. And, it's a tower case in this case. But the chance of the power supply in the hard drives or just the fans on the CPU and stuff failing after that amount of time, you really have to consider what kind of workload you're going to put it for.
Yeah.
It can make a fine lab server for home, but
what do you think about like if he replaced the drives or maybe attach an external array, eSATA or something, maybe a file server?
Well, it won't have eSATA.
That's true.
Well, I guess a PCI card or something.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, you could add an expansion card. Yeah, I'm looking at it.
Well, he doesn't say what he was going to use it for. It sounds like it was free, and so he took it.
I mean, if it had redundant power supplies, then maybe, because that model did support
Well, if
redundant.
it's just for home and for a lab, if you're just going to play around with Ubuntu and FreeBSD or something on it, then sure, it's fine.
Looks Familiar says that it does not support USB booting. He has one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in general...
Why though?
I wouldn't put it in production, but at your house, it's a good machine to screw around on. I
guess
suppose.
Here's what I would honestly see that PowerEdge as competition, and I'm not trying to be diminutive, but it's a Raspberry Pi. And if you look at it, it's not 1-to-1 in performance, but in terms of like what you're going to want it to do, it's probably not much more than what a Pi could do, and the Pi is going to be a drop in the bucket in power use in comparison. Now you got ARM, you got to deal with on the Pi, and it's not, I've had my Pi.
Right, it doesn't have a CD-ROM drive that you can just drop a CD.
You could do USB. I mean, I've got one right here from Q5sys in our chat room. I've got an 8 gigabyte Arch image on there. And, I've run this sucker for a couple of days, and all of a sudden, like, the Ethernet will just drop off the network or it'll lock up. And, So
he doesn't really mention what he wants to use it for, and he just asks if it's useful for anything. And, if you stuck a couple of spare network cards in it, it would be a great pfSense box, although it uses quite a bit of power.
If your Switch supports port mirroring, you'd make a good end-top box. You could do some traffic analysis. Yeah, I mean, there's probably things you could find.
This is mostly probably going to be for his house, so he probably doesn't need an end-top box.
But who doesn't need an end-top box?
I suppose. I don't even use one, but
I mean, they're good rigs. I mean, I've had them in production, and they are very stable, but it is getting old. So
yeah, so. Free hardware is free hardware. If you have a use for it, then sure. I wouldn't go trying to make it into your NAS with two aged 80 gig Maxtor hard drives.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. It'll be disappointing.
But in general, it could be fun to play with. Play with Ubuntu. There's just something a little different about putting Ubuntu and FreeBSD and stuff on real hardware as opposed to just playing with it in a virtual machine.
Yeah, I mean, it could be great for experimenting, right?
Yes, that's what I like a lab machine.
Totally, I see what you're saying.
Trying things out, or the best way to learn about networking and stuff is to have network computers in your house and do stuff with them.
Yeah, that's a great point, Alan. All right, well, Mike writes in, and maybe the chat room has a few suggestions. I was you know, we've kind of answered this in various versions before, but Mike writes in. He says, on last week's TechSNAP, Chris mentioned that he has a pfSense firewall with a DMZ. What hardware do you recommend for a pfSense box? I visited the recommended hardware section on the pfSense website, but what would you recommend based on the networks that are more like mine? Also, Alan mentioned some inexpensive Wi-Fi modules he uses. What are these, and what do you just set them up? And do you just set them up as access points connected to a port on your router? I think he's asking versus that directly to the firewall.
Yeah. So the recommended hardware for the pfSense box, it depends on what you're doing. He says a network more like his, and I don't know what his network is. But you know, on pfSense, they talk to a couple different places. There's like Socris makes the boxes, but they're stereo only, so it's probably a little bit less for something like a pfSense. I forget what the name of the company is. There's a couple of companies that link from the pfSense site that make little, like small boxes that you can put pfSense on, and those all work great. And for the price, they're good. I just bought a regular, like, server i3, like a super micro short depth machine from IX Systems, and it has 4 gigabit Ethernet ports, and I installed FreeBSD on it. And I actually, instead of giving the whole box to pfSense, I just installed FreeBSD on it and copy and pasted the rules out of my pfSense. Since I can edit the rules without needing to use a web interface because I'm me. But
so I did something I don't normally do. I bought mine off eBay, and I got the same thing. It's like an i5 box. I thought I needed more horsepower than I really do, but on eBay you can find things like fireboxes that they've replaced the firmware and upgraded them.
I had a friend that did a firebox which had like 5 Realtek NICs in it or something. Yeah,
I mean, this is nice.
I prefer Intel NICs, but
here you can buy it now on eBay for $110. A firebox loaded with pfSense. There's also there's a lot of people that sell like bare bones preloaded pfSense firewalls with multiple NICs. Just the only gotcha is just double check compatibility when you're specing a machine.
Right, and that's probably why he was looking at the ones on the pfSense site, because they've already done that. But
really,
I don't know,
if BSD supports it, pfSense supports it.
Well, you have to remember that pfSense is based on FreeBSD 8.3, so some of the newer NICs are not supported, although they just did a release this week that updated the Intel drivers to support the newer ones, like the i3.
Okay, that's nice.
The i210 and the i350s.
I've been really happy with my pfSense box. It was more powerful than I needed, so I kind of regret that, because then that came with it cooling requirements that are obnoxious because it's very loud. But it's just an x86 PC, and if you have an x86 PC laying around, it can be slow. It doesn't matter.
Until I bought that box from IX Systems in preparation for getting a much faster internet connection, my pfSense box was an old Pentium 3 that was sitting in the corner of my basement. Yeah, which has now been retired to sitting in the corner of my basement again.
It's fine,
and it worked perfectly fine. Yeah. The new box actually uses less power and has a brand new quad-core Haswell processor and 8 gigs of RAM instead of 384 megs, but you get the idea. Yeah,
I mean, Mike, really, the other thing you could do is just go see what some guys are selling on eBay and either replicate that on your own or pick one up. And if you have the extra cash to spend, I would, if you want something that's going to be really solid, consider what Alan did and get a short depth box from IX Systems, and then that's just going to last you forever and be rock solid. All right, our next email comes in from Paul.
No, he had one more question. He was asking about the wireless modules.
Right.
I bought them in Japan. They're the tiny little things, and they have a Ethernet port. So I just plugged them into my switch, and then they're then connected to the pfSense box.
Yeah, there you go.
I'm trying to remember the model number, but
we linked them way back in the show notes. Yeah. But I can't remember. You might be able to search the Jupiter Broadcasting site and find them.
Yeah,
but I think they even sell them on Amazon, but they're not as cheap as you got them while you're in Japan.
Yeah, I think I have it here. One sec.
Yeah. See, I don't see any recommendations from the chat room on the hardware, but some people are doing it on Atom PCs. Actually, that's a good recommendation. And
Atoms, as long as it's got enough network cards, then as long as you're not trying to push gigabit out of it in every direction or whatever, it should be fine.
Yeah. I've been using, I got it myself, I can't remember the model, but I talked about it in an episode of the Linux Action Show. I got specifically a router that I could replace the firmware on and I think I put DDWRT on there. I did a whole episode of last about it. And that has worked really well for me because, A, I can trust the firmware better. And it's not that I'm really all that paranoid, but
Right.
We talk about so many stories here on TechSNAP about how the default firmware is just riddled with vulnerabilities and backdoors, and I just thought, you know what? I don't want to worry about it. So I got one intentionally, and I just that I could replace the firmware, and I just have that plugged straight into my wireless, into my wired switch. I don't have it hanging off of. I did have one hanging off of the DMZ for a little while, but I ended up reclaiming them. Yeah. All right. So did you add those to the show notes?
I added it. Yes, it was in TechSNAP 102, but I added the link with the updated affiliate code and all that stuff.
That was a while ago. Cool.
Yeah,
all right.
That was like, well, yeah, it would have been after I got back from Asia last year, and
so they're Plan X is what is the brand Plan X. Okay. Yeah, we'll have a link to that. So try that.
And they were great for. I paid like $17 when I bought them in Japan in the store.
Multi-band and support and out the wazoo. All right, our next question comes in from Paul. It says, hello, Alan and Chris. Love the show and watch it every single week, BSD now as well. I was wondering, since SSD drives can only handle so many writes before they start failing, does this not make them in a RAID environment useless? It seems to me that since RAID spreads out the writes across all devices, then that would lead to the devices failing at the same time, possibly before they could even be replaced in time for the RAID to rebuild itself. Your thoughts, and thanks for the great shows. What do you think, Alan?
It can. Most of the drives that have a limited amount of wear like that have smart data that will tell you when the drives are wearing out. And with something like RAID Z, you can replace the drives one at a time because you have the redundancy in order to deal with that.
So you'd have to keep on top of it.
Yeah. And if it was predictable enough, then you could have it. You could set it up where your drives are staggered. So like you'd start replacing 2 of the 8 drives, and then later you replace 2 more or something, and do it so that the drives aren't all failing at the same time. In general, though, the SSDs, especially if you're using, if it's a server or something, you're using the enterprise or data center class ones, you're talking like they're going to last 5 years as long as the drives are going to last if it was a spinning drive, right? So it's not really going to wear out any faster than a spinning drive would have.
But I do find the concept interesting where if you know that drives have X number of fixed writes and you use a RAID and it writes them all out kind of evenly, would they all start to expire right around the same time? Whereas with spinning disks, they'll just kind of, the mechanics break down and then they fail or whatever it is. But on SSDs, it would be interesting if you had a server running 5 years and all of a sudden they all start dying.
Right, but most of them have smart data that tells you what % of their wear they're at.
Right. And the other thing,
once it starts getting low, you could actually be getting alerted and be like, oh, hey, I should look at this.
The other thing that would be hard to factor for is the SSD drives themselves, the controllers in the drive, have smarts to randomize and move around where they get written and monitor the bad blocks themselves. So they internally are doing some math to sort of equalize that out. So I would bet because of that, you're probably not going to see a bunch of drives failing at the same time because each drive is actually writing that data differently.
But, if you're using good enough SSDs, like the Intel S3700s I bought, they're probably going to last longer than the usefulness of their size.
Yeah, for sure.
You'll replace the drive with a bigger one before it wears out.
Yeah, that's my thinking on SSDs right now. I mean, I'm getting 128s and 256s, the occasional 512 drive, and I'm not really going above that.
Right,
because
I have a 40 gig drive for the desktop class one.
Yeah.
But the servers, the data center edition ones were like $600 for 200 gigs.
Yeah.
So you're not buying the 1 terabyte one.
Right.
I can tell you that. Yeah. At $2.50 a gig, you're not buying the 1 terabyte one.
No, not for a while at least. But in a couple of years, when I need more capacity, I'm hoping that those prices will continue to drop.
And if you do something like ZFS with RAID Z, and you have 2 drives in a mirror, 4 drives in a RAID 10, or 6 drives in a RAID Z2 or something, then the fact that you can replace 1 drive at a time with a bigger one and let it resilver, and then it'll just snap up and have the bigger available capacity, means that you can grow the storage without having to reboot.
That's awesome. That's sort of like a Drobo built into your file system.
Kind of, yeah.
Sort of. All right, well, our last email comes from Bunny, and she writes in, with the Olympics coming up, I've seen lots of conversation about Olympic curling competition. I was so psyched to see that using Linux was finally an Olympic sport, but apparently I misunderstood. I'm told that since Alan is Canadian, he will be able to explain curling and how it's different from curl. Yours truly, in the spirit of international friendship, Bunny. And says, P.S. I'm teaching during the live recording, so don't go about asking me questions and expecting answers. That's somebody who knows us.
Yes.
So, Alan, could you explain the difference for Bunny?
Well, one is a sport about throwing rocks, and so a lot of people probably heard of the tool curl, and they don't really know what it is. But originally, it was a C library for dealing with URLs. So it's the everything client. It's HTTP, FTP, HTTPS. It can do RTSP, RTMP.
SMTP.
I think it does SMTP,
Yeah.
Gopher. It can do proxies. The number of protocols it can do.
It even does IMAP and LDAP and pop. Yeah. That's crazy.
It can. If there's something on the internet, it can probably download it. And it's all, rather than, there's a big command line version of it, which is useful, but mostly it's a library to make it so that when you want to build an HTTP client into your application, you don't have to write it yourself.
Yeah.
Right? It's kind of gives you this this common tool that's a proper implementation rather than having to deal with doing it all yourself.
libcurl, buddy.
Yeah.
Just use libcurl.
And it's MIT licensed. So that's basically like a BSD license. And so basically it's a reference implementation that's done correctly rather than everybody trying to do their own and making the same mistakes over and over again or having flaws in it where, some malicious website could send a certain header and crash your app or execute code on you or something like that. And so, curl is very useful.
They have on their website in a bold tag, possibly more than 500 million users already. I'm sure you can use it as well. That's their slogan.
Yeah.
That's great. All right. Well,
I make extensive use of it.
So, and people are probably using it, don't even realize they're using it all the time. So look, we need more of your feedback because we have a doubleheader next week. So email us, TechSNAP@jupiterbroadcasting.com, or even better, pop that contact link. Choose TechSNAP from the dropdown, or if you're a baller, go over to links.techsnap.tv and do it right. Submit it to our subreddit, and then we'll get those in next week's episode when we're recording 2 shows back-to-back. Join us at 11 a.m. Pacific over at jblive.tv next week. But Alan, with the feedback all done, that means it's time for the TechSNAP Roundup. Welcome to the TechSNAP Roundup. Yeah, that's what that crazy music means. Now, the Roundup are stories that just didn't quite fit at the top of the show, but we still want to talk about them. Some of these links came from our subreddit over at links.techsnap.tv. And, of course, all of these links will be in our show notes so you can read the stories in their entirety after the show. So, Alan, our first story is this massive story that's been going around about how I lost my $50,000 Twitter username. I haven't quite followed it, but it sounds like it's kind of a calamity of mistakes. What's going on?
Yeah, so this guy got a message saying that, they were trying to extort him. Basically, like, give us your Twitter account or we'll take all your websites.
He has like @n. I mean, so
yes.
he goes. I read a little bit down here in the article. It says here that like he gets requests for that all the time. It's such a rare username.
I mean, people. That's where the $50,000 number came from. It's the most money he's ever been offered for his Twitter username.
Okay.
And so one day he gets a message saying that, hey, I've hacked your GoDaddy account. You have some very nice websites here. If you don't want me to steal those, I'm going to need to steal your Twitter account.
Wow.
Or something like that. Well, it seems apparently, according to the original article, the bad guys called up PayPal, pretended to be this guy with the information they had collected, and social engineered PayPal enough to get like the last 4 digits of his credit card or something. Then they called up GoDaddy and used all the information they had, plus what they had gotten from PayPal, to convince GoDaddy to reset the password on the account and let the guy in, the bad guy.
This reminds me of that Apple incident with Matt What's-His-Face when the iCloud account got compromised.
Yes, very similar, I think. And then once they had his GoDaddy, his Twitter account used a domain he owned rather than like a Gmail account. And so once they had his GoDaddy, they could control where his email went. And so they could get the password reset information and so on. And basically, apparently, they blackmailed the guy into giving up the Twitter account in order to not lose his websites or something.
So it sounds like you have PayPal, who was socially engineered, GoDaddy was socially engineered. But my question is now that this story has blown up to the degree it has, why hasn't Twitter just returned the account?
Well, I kind of wonder if I would have given in to the guy as well.
Oh, like just decided to pay him or whatever he want. What did he want?
Well, no, I wouldn't give up the Twitter username. I'd be like, I actually own those domains, so it might take a couple days, but I'm sure that I could get them back.
Oh, I see. Okay. I didn't.
Right?
Yeah. Absolutely.
But I guess at the same time, I suppose I could probably get the Twitter account back, right? So maybe it makes sense.
I'd have more faith in getting my domains back than my Twitter account any day. That's for sure.
Exactly, because domains are something you paid for, and a Twitter account isn't.
Yeah, and companies like GoDaddy have processes in place, whereas Twitter is Twitter.
Yeah.
All right.
But it seems like that could have been solved on all accounts by using two-factor authentication on all three services.
Yeah. How often do we hear that too, right? And it's
kind of becoming required now.
Recount the basics. If it's an important account, use two-factor. Use a different password than you use, like on your email and all that kind of stuff. Use different passwords for every service, and when possible, maybe even use different email addresses if that's a possibility.
And the recommendation of the guy who with this @n Twitter handle was to use a major service like Gmail as the email backing your Twitter account, so that someone can't compromise just your domain to get access. Whereas, personally myself, I prefer using my own domains because then I have complete control over that email server.
Right. Yeah.
But I've also, I've seen people, lose access to a domain where they forgot to renew it or something, and then years later they're like, oh, I can't reset the password on that old Twitter account now because I don't own the domain anymore.
That happens all the time.
So there is the advantage of that.
Yeah.
But you can have the same problem if you let like a Hotmail account expire and someone else takes it, right? So
true.
And we kind of talked about that a bit when Yahoo was saying they were going to recycle usernames that hadn't been used in years.
Right.
Is that people all of a sudden could start resetting passwords for old MySpace accounts and stuff.
Our next story in the roundup is kind of related to this story, isn't it?
There's one update there that PayPal came out and denied that they provided any information, although they're not releasing the recordings of the phone calls. Although they claim from their reports or something that they don't think they gave out the information. But they don't mention that they listen to recordings of the call, if there even is any. They kind of just think that they didn't give it out based on they don't want to have said that they did. It's not clear exactly what information they may or may not have given out or how certain it is that they didn't give out anything. They want to think they didn't give out anything. And then GoDaddy admitted that they were socially engineered and that it was only possible because the guy already had so much information, but that they're updating their training to make that harder as well.
Yeah, it sounds like they actually had the last 6 digits of his credit card number.
Yeah. Although the last digits of the credit card number are not that strong of an authenticator.
No, they're not.
Although I've seen worse ones.
Yeah. Yeah.
That actually kind of makes me think of that the network solution service we were making fun of the other week. Where they wanted $1,850 a year, and that way every time a change was going to be made to your domain, they would call you and make you give them a 9-digit PIN that they had emailed you or that they had snail mailed you at least 45 days before this, so that you could prove that you were actually the owner of the domain.
He should have signed up for that service. It would have saved it. Jesus.
Now that exists, I'm expecting to see more registrars offer something like that for $10 a year rather than $1,850.
Oh, Marissa in our chat room says that he had to guess the first 2 digits of the credit card, and then he knew the last 4 digits of the credit card. So he guessed correctly.
Well, the first 4 are pretty easy to get or guess. The first 4 tell you the bank. If you know the bank, problem solved. Also, most websites, like if you log into or get a screenshot, or get access to somebody's Amazon account or something, it lists the first 2 or 4 and the last 2 or something like that. And if you look at like the little receipts that come out of bank machines that people just throw away, they start at the middle of the card number, but usually the first 2 and last 2 digits.
Or sometimes on restaurant receipts even. I've seen, especially the last 4. I see that quite a bit.
Exactly. And so a company asking you for the last 4 is not a strong authenticator because you could have got that by just stealing a discarded receipt.
Well, I think about it every time I call my bank and they ask me for, all the generic things that they always ask for. And it's like, gosh, really with some good Google searching and just some real digging, I could get answers to all that stuff and not be me. The worst one, though, when you call the credit card company and they just want to know your mother's maiden name, if you just mumble something, they used to just accept that. I wonder.
You know, it's like you didn't say I don't know. You said, and so they're like, oh, okay.
I wonder how much more of this we're going to be hearing, right? Because it seems like it's this really hard barrier that customer service goes up against, where they don't want to make it excruciating for the customer to identify themselves because that's a bad customer experience, and they're not going to want to do that. But at the same time,
and at the same time, you know, customers don't want to have to give up their all of their personal information to the company so that they can later be used to verify their identity.
Yeah.
Because also, you know, if every little website out there wants to know everything about you, that means that once somebody hacks one or two of those, they then have all the answers to attack one of the other ones.
What do you think about lying? Like giving wrong maiden names and things like that.
Right, but you have to remember which the wrong answer is.
Yes.
And if you use the same wrong answer at two places, if one gets hacked, that then exposes the other one. So unless you're going to claim your middle name for GoDaddy is GoDaddy or something, then or Danica,
or note it down.
Remember that years from now, when Danica hasn't been the spokesperson for GoDaddy for a long time,
right?
It's like how.
Yeah, it's something you want to know 5 years down the road when you're calling to make a change to the domain you've owned forever.
Yeah,
yeah.
I've had that embarrassing thing before where it was I forget what site. And they asked what my favorite food was, and I put something crude, and then when I had to call them for something billing related, no, it's just billing related. They wanted to know the answer, and I was like, what the hell would I have said?
I agree.
And then they looked at the answer, and they were like, I see why he doesn't want to say it. Honestly, it was because I didn't remember, but also because it said, yes, it was very crude because, you know, I was like 17 and crude.
So Don Thornton Jr. in the chat room says this would be a good use of the LastPass note feature when you're saving a username and password. There's a notes field you can put any arbitrary data into. So you could put things like, I said this for my mother's maiden name.
Yep, that's not bad advice.
So our next story is kind of related, though. It's about social engineering.
Yes, Security Week has an article. It's called "Yes, Virginia, There Really Is Social Engineering."
Does anybody doubt it? Apparently somebody
and
does.
It goes on to talk about some of the stuff, especially with bank phishing and things like that, and how some of them are actually getting good enough that legitimate people or people with half-decent skills could start to actually be fooled by it for a minute.
He also says give consideration to things like extended absent messages that might be giving away additional info than you want.
Yeah.
Minimize the ease of use of which an attacker can identify a valid email address at your organization. Your email server should be configured so it does not respond to invalid requests. Lots of tips in here, actually, that are seriously pretty good. Beware of company-specific jargon. Yeah, okay, good one. I like that.
Yeah, but, he was saying, like, I got this thing from my bank, and it had, my name and my address and the last 4 digits of my credit card number and all this, but it was to an email address I would have never given the bank. And that's how he knew that it was fake.
How is this possible? Our next story in the roundup sounds like it can't actually be possible. I guess they're pulling from W3 School stats. They're saying that IE's browser market share has dropped to single digits, just 9% now. Yeah,
so Slashdot had this headline, and I was like, oh, that's crazy good news. I will have to feature that in the show. And then I clicked through the link, and I see the source is just the log analytics of
schools,
W3 Schools, which is just a website that teaches basics of HTML and so on. And you can tell that the current statistics are 9% Internet Explorer, 27% Firefox, 55% Chrome, 4% Safari, and 2% Opera.
Mm-hmm.
You can tell that the website is mostly frequented by people trying to learn HTML,
right?
Or amateur web developers and stuff. Yeah. That's why Chrome is so much heavier than normal on there.
Yeah.
And Internet Explorer is so low, right? Because if you're a web developer, the last thing you want to do is use Internet Explorer all the time.
This is having fun with numbers, isn't it?
Yeah. But it's just completely useless information because, if you look at general websites, the numbers are not this clear. And, it's like in the comments, the way is like, well, I work for an insurance company, and on our site, it's about 40% Internet Explorer.
Yeah, yeah. I wonder, could this be indicative of future trends? If people that are making the sites aren't using IE, that means they're not targeting for IE anymore, which means they're maybe...
Partly. But, they probably still check their site in IE, but they don't look up the reference on how to do the HTML in IE.
Yeah,
right?
they still test it in IE. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's true. All right.
And, with websites like Browser Shots, you can do stuff like that.
That's a great site. This is a great...
It's interesting to watch the stats there. Like they go back all the way to 2002, where Internet Explorer was 85% of the market share, AOL was 3, and Netscape was 8, and then that held until about 2005 when Firefox came out, jumping from 0 to 16% to 24% by the end of the year. And Internet Explorer was down to 70%. And then by 2006, it was down to 60%. 2007, down to 55. And then you can see September 2008, Chrome appears with 3%. And then Internet Explorer and Firefox about tied about 45. And then it keeps skewing. And
Chrome just keeps
Firefox holds
growing.
out at about 45 and then drops to 40 when Chrome gets to 30 in Internet Explorer to 22. And then it kind of wheels out a little bit and is down to 25 to 55% for Chrome.
I wonder if that Chrome momentum is going to slow or if it's going to continue, because Chrome every year Chrome jumped 10% between 2012 and 2013.
Yeah, but I've heard from a lot of people recently that they're starting to prefer Firefox again.
Yeah, me too. I'm one of those people, so that's why I wonder if that momentum is going to slow or not. Maybe, it's hard to say, because sometimes people are just now finding out about stuff that the geeks have known about for years, and so on and so forth. And again, that is skewed.
And part of it, part of that could be pushed by, people using devices that come with Chrome and stuff.
Yeah, it's true. All right, well, EnterpriseStorageForum.com has a write-up of selecting a disk drive, how not to do research.
Yeah, so this is their, we talked about the Backblaze study that was published the other week, and these guys have a couple of nits to pick about it.
Well, we were doing a little nitpicking, too, on kind of how they got their data, but yeah, go ahead.
And so they broke down some of the more detailed data, and they have a nice little chart here. And, specifically, they were talking about, remember, there was one category of drives where they were talking about like a 25% annual failure rate.
Yeah.
And when Enterprise Storage Forum looked at it, those were specifically those 1,500 gigabyte 341 AS drives from Seagate. Yeah. Which Seagate acknowledged actually had a problem, and they stopped making them. But also, all of those drives are from 2006. Now, the average age they say is 4 years, but the drive was sitting on a shelf for a couple of years before you started using it. It doesn't technically affect the age as much. But even then, the average age of the drive is 4 years, meaning that most of them, an average is a really useless statistic, right? If they had a median where you say at least half the drives are more than 4 years old, that would be a much different stat than saying the average is 4 years.
Right.
Because a couple of new 1.5 terabyte drives, which there probably aren't any, would really skew those numbers.
Yeah, I think we also kind of picked on that point a bit in the show. And, I still thought, though, it was interesting that both our experiences still kind of synced up with their data, even if it was a little wonky. Yeah, like the 1.5 drives totally got bit by those.
Like Seagate admitted there was a problem there.
Yeah.
And, that's... And, yeah. But anyway, they pick on they pick through the stats and kind of give you a better idea and actually explain some of the other numbers in there, like what the annualized failure ratio is about, what the load unload cycles are, and how that affects it, and the new stats we kind of talked about a little bit earlier in the show about looking at how much a drive is meant to be able to take, right?
Yeah,
like looking at the
amount of total terabytes you're going to write to it over its lifetime, things like that.
Yeah,
and
activity. The cheapest Seagate desktop drives are set up for 55 terabytes a year. If you go at the drive's max speed of 145 megabytes a second, that's only 105 hours.
That's interesting to think about it like that.
It's meant for a desktop drive, which, it gets some usage, but you're not
a race car.
You're not filling it constantly as you would if it was, say, running a backup service like Backblaze.
Yeah.
Right? Now, with Backblaze, they're probably writing it once and then it just sits there if it never gets restored, and so that can have effect on it as well. But the biggest factors that Backblaze didn't talk about at all were things like heat and vibration. Now, looking at those Backblaze cases, I can imagine some of those drives are not running as cold as some of my drives.
Yeah, they get packed in there pretty. I mean, that's the whole point, right? You fit as many drives as they can.
Right. Whereas, with my drives, most of mine have never been above 30 degrees Celsius. Where if they're running their drives at 50 degrees, which is still within the acceptable range, but is definitely going to shorten the life of the drive compared to mine.
Yeah.
So even if mine are getting more work, because they're running colder, they might last longer.
It reminds me of the Netflix box, which also is very high dense drives, but they specifically designed figuring that because they're so dense, they're probably going to experience failures.
Yeah, their whole point is just, we'll just replace the whole box once enough of it fails. And they don't seem to be having that much trouble. Although we'd love to see some statistics from them. But basically the problem with this is, if you want to do this study properly, some lab would have to just spend a giant pile of money on a whole bunch of a lot of different kinds of hard drives, and then set them up and with a bunch of different types of workloads on them, and then run them for 5 years and then publish a report. And by then, none of the drives that they used would be on the market anymore.
Exactly.
And so, yeah, you basically can't tell how good a drive is going to be until after it's done its service.
That's why you don't depend on one single drive.
Yeah. And that's why, we kind of talked about it a little bit, but when you buy drives from NetApp, you notice that they're so much more expensive than if you bought the exact same drive from somebody else.
Mm-hmm. We've got questions about that.
So what NetApp does is they buy giant batches of hard drives, and they test them all, and they do like a burn-in on them to see if they fail. And then they pick only the set of drives that perform the best out of all the different batches they bought.
Oh, okay.
And they just throw the rest away. So the reason you're paying more is because they had to buy 4 hard drives for every one they sell you.
Huh.
Because they just return the rest or throw them away.
Well, when it matters, there's people are willing to pay a price for that.
Yeah.
When it's critical. Or should we shift gears to this?
And they just have a table explaining the difference between SATA consumer, SATA enterprise, and enterprise SAS drives and fiber channel drives and so on.
Oh, that's cool.
And the math of what happens when if you put 8 drives. So if the chances 1 in every 10 to the power 14 bits will be bad, hard error, that's so often. But if you have 8 of them, the chance of one of them doing that goes up to almost 100%. And that's why things like ZFS are so important, because you can't trust the drives no matter how much money you spend on them.
Mm-hmm. Gosh, I'm ready for a whole new technology.
Have lots of them.
Yeah. I'm ready for spinning drives to die, Alan. I'm ready.
No, I still love my spinning drives. Just give me lots and lots of them.
Yeah. Yeah.
And ZFS to make it work.
You got to have them now because you need the storage. Like, we're recording right now onto a RAID 0 that is comprised of 3 hard drives because I have to have terabytes of storage in order to there's just no way I could do that with SSDs. That's all I could spend my money on. So it's going to be a while. Not going to happen overnight. So there's this ICS Diary report where they went through Cisco's annual security report and found a few tidbits. What jumped out at you?
Specifically, they just had a couple of one-liners in there that, like the sentence they highlighted was pretty interesting.
The report highlighted a fact that the cybercrime network has become so mature, so far-reaching, so well-funded and highly effective as a business operation that very little in the cybersecurity world can or should be trusted without verification.
Yeah, basically, the bad guys are making so much money at this that, they're able to pull off things that we never would have thought anybody would do before.
The attack surface is no longer limited to just PCs and servers, but any mobile device. They've been growing in numbers at a rapid pace and need to be part of an all-enterprise security models. Well, isn't that true?
But some of the scary ones, 91% of all web exploits targeted Java.
Wow. That's no joke.
64% of all malware was a Trojan, so that they could then do something else with your computer.
Yep.
But also, they said that 99% of all mobile malware in 2013 was targeted at Android devices.
Jeez.
That number seems a little skewed. I know there was some stuff for iPhone.
I guess it depends on what you consider. Well, yeah, that does seem skewed, unless you're just talking about stuff that makes it into the store.
I think there was very, very small amounts of malware for Android, and so 99% of 10 is
good point.
10.
Yeah, that's true.
It's not like without harder numbers to actually look at, it's hard to say.
But what I've said before, and it makes me sound like an Android hater, but I've said before, the problem with Android is Apple has a very well-defined update cycle that reaches back like 3 or 4 years worth of devices, where Android is really all over the place.
They often just drop the older devices too, though. Right?
Yeah.
Part of Apple's thing is just like, all right, there's no more updates for that device.
Right, but here's the thing, like today...
And they expect you to just buy a new one.
But today you can load iOS 7 on an iPhone 4, which they've had the 5, the 5S, the 4S. So that's 3 or 4 generations of phones that you can still load, whereas There are Nexus devices that were sold last year that because the vendor that made the chip just decided to no longer make that chip, so they're not providing Google with a driver. So Google just says, we're not updating that phone anymore. Yeah, you bought it 3 months ago, but we're just not going to update it anymore. Like, that has literally happened even to the Nexus devices in the Google lineup, not to mention all the HTC phones that don't, and these things are running Linux, and these Linux operating systems have vulnerabilities, and they're always connected to the network. To me, it's a honeypot. It's waiting to happen.
To be confused about the difference between a security branch and updates, right? It's like you can still do an update to the phone that just fixes the security problem. You don't have to bring the new features with every update.
Exactly.
Like, you don't only include security updates when you get new features, like, Apple does.
Right? They could. You nailed it. You nailed it because
OS
like HTC
10 on a Mac, like on a computer.
Yeah.
There are some new security features that only come if you buy the new OS.
That's true though with 7 and XP and 8, like Microsoft. For example,
XP up until the end of its life date there gets all
security
the
updates, right? But there's
all the security patches.
There's new security
Apple
features.
Stopped doing that.
But there's new security features that they don't backport.
Right,
That's
security features is one thing, but not fixing a exploit because people should just buy the new version
because they're lazy, basically.
Yeah. Well, no, it's because they want you to buy the new version.
But I think you nailed it. Like in terms of phone vendors, OEMs. They don't just push out security updates. Like, well, we're only going to do an update if the new device can handle the brand new version of HTC Sense. Or Samsung won't push out a new update unless it can handle all of Touch UI.
They're trying to evolve so fast, and they don't have a security branch.
Why not just do that? If you're going to make a phone, commit to like 3 years of updates.
Yeah, but that's something that would have to be regulated or something rather than because nobody wants to do that.
It's true. It just costs them money, right?
Yep.
They'd much rather you just buy a new phone. All right, did you hear about this Gmail bug that sent a ton of emails to just one guy on Hotmail? It was Hotmail, right? He was on?
I think he was on Gmail, actually.
TechCrunch, it's a Gmail bug. Apparently, Google ran a search for, if you ran a Google search for Gmail while logged in and clicked on one of the top and correct results, it brings up a compose window with an email address already filled in. The Hotmail account of a Fresco, California man. So it just did the mail to thing.
So all these emails people meant to send to somebody else from their Gmail, they accidentally sent to this guy.
The article says it's related to the Gmail outage that happened. Maybe that automatic configuration robot's automatically configuring the wrong things all over the place. This one is a little disappointing, and it's exactly what we've warned about here, and it really reinforces the reason to run your own mail server. If you use Tor Mail ever, then your account has been seized by the FBI not because they were going after you, but because they were going after supposedly some child porn. While investigating a hosting company known for sheltering child porn last year, the FBI incidentally seized an entire email database of the popular anonymous webmail service called TorMail. Now the FBI is tapping into that vast trove of emails in unrelated investigations. The Bureau considers this a windfall because now they're going out, and this article, which I have linked in the roundup, says the Bureau's data windfall seized from a company called Freedom Hosting surfaced in court papers last week when the prosecutors indicated a Florida man for allegedly selling counterfeit credit cards online. The filings show the FBI built its case in part by executing a search warrant on a Gmail account used by the counterfeiters where they found orders for forged cards were being sent to a Tor email account. They say, according to new documents, the FBI attained the data belonging to Freedom Hosting's customer through a mutual legal assistance request to France, where the company leased its servers between July 22nd of 2013 and August 2nd. So they used this interoperability agreement. They got the entire database, and now they're just picking through it and going after other cases that they're building from this database. And this...
See, normally, when you get a subpoena or something to seize something like that, or a search warrant, it's... the judge makes you limit the scope to only the stuff related to the case you're trying to prosecute.
Yeah.
Right? You can't just go have literally what was called a fishing expedition, just go and look for any wrongdoing.
Yeah. I think they went in and they went in proclaiming, think of the children, save the children, knowing that Tor Mail is probably used by some shady characters because of what it's about.
They should have been required to have one specific case in mind and only been able to use the data from that one specific case, and any other data they used would be fruit of the poisonous tree, as it were, in legal terms, where they're not allowed to use that because they shouldn't have known that. By looking at the data not related to that case, it would actually hinder their ability to prosecute that case because they shouldn't have known that information, and it taints their ability to investigate it legitimately. And so they really should have had a much narrower scope on which data they got.
They wanted the whole database. I think that was the tension.
But they shouldn't have been allowed to get it. That's why a judge is supposed to be involved in a search warrant.
This probably isn't the only time this has happened.
Oh yes.
So the only real recourse is not to have your email hosted on a service that thousands of other people use. Because at any point, I mean,
right. One of those people could result in your information.
So three things happened to make this possible. They walked into Google. Excuse me, Google, we'd like to have access to this guy's Gmail account. They got it. Then they went to France and said, hello, we'd like to seize these servers. Will you let us in? They let them. And then the FBI goes in, takes the entire server, and makes a copy of the SQL database. They literally take the server out of the rack. They don't even tell the provider. They just go in there and rip it out of the rack. And then they copy everything off the hard drive, including the entire database. And then they're just allowed to cherry pick it as they wish. And the only protection users have is not to have their email hosted on the same server that other people's email is on. The only thing I can think of. All right. Well, let's shift gears and talk about the DOJ, who's saying that the company that vetted Edward Snowden has faked 665,000 background checks for the federal government. Wow. Now, that's some incompetence.
Yeah. So this company, USIS, was contracted to do background checks for the federal government and intelligence community. And they've been caught falsifying reports and claiming to have interviewed people that were dead and all kinds of nonsense like that. So it says here that beginning in at least March 2008 and continuing through at least September 2012, USIS management devised and executed a scheme to deliberately circumvent contractual requirements qualifying reviews of complete background check investigations in order to increase the company's revenue and profits. Basically, it's cheaper to say, yeah, that person's okay than to actually check out if they're okay.
But it's mind-boggling because this is literally their job. This is why they're being hired.
All they do. This is all they do. They're a background search company, and they were just turfing the background search.
So is somebody going to get fired over this?
USIS devised a practice referred internally to as dumping or flushing,
oh my gosh.
Which involved releasing cases to the OPM and representing them as completed when, in fact, not all of the ROIs compromising these cases had received a quality review as required by the fieldwork contracts. It's basically saying, yeah, that person's okay without actually doing the checking. USIS engaged in this practice of dumping in order to meet budgeted goals and therefore increases revenue and profits.
Documents confirm senior management was aware and directed the dumping practices.
Initially, USIS would dump cases manually. Soon after this dumping started, however, they're like, oh, great, this is great. We're making so much money. USIS began using a software program called Blue Zone to assist them in automatically dumping cases.
Oh, my gosh.
Through Blue Zone, USIS was able to identify a large number of background investigations, quickly make an electronic review complete notation on those cases, and not actually have to do any work and get paid.
Check out one of the quotes from the email. The shelves are as clean as they can get. Flushed everything like a dead goldfish. That's in the email threads that have been exposed. And here's another one. It's Flushy McFlusherson at Mary and his Merry Hijinks again. Leprechaun dance. I'm not tired. They are throwing it in our faces. At least it was my tax dollars at work. So that at least I have that. So that's good.
I don't know. That kind of thing didn't happen in Canada. When a friend of mine got when a student of mine got a job at a defense contractor here, I got quite a few different sets of phone calls. There was one company who was just fact checking the things that were on his resume. It's like, was he in your class from this date to this date? Did he graduate? Was he a student mentor and things like that? And then there was a separate company who asked me things about him. It's like, does he have any relationships that could compromise his ability to keep secrets and things like this? Right? It's like, does he know any Russians?
Wow, really?
not quite, but almost. It was veiled enough to not get in trouble for asking that question,
right? And
things like that. And, you know, it was like, wow, somebody's taking this background check seriously.
That's nice.
Which is the opposite of what was happening here.
All right, kids, we'll get your pen and paper out because Alan's about to tell you about 4 HTTP security headers you should always be using.
Yeah, this is just a post I came across the other day. It was pretty interesting.
Number one, content security policy. What's good about it? What's so good about it, Alan?
Basically, it can prevent cross-site scripting by basically a header from your web server saying scripts, a JavaScript for this site will only ever come from these URLs. So if you see something that's a different URL, that's bad, don't do it. Or a connect source saying that only make AJAX or WebSocket connections to these addresses. Anything else is bad. Or, frames this site can only be put in a frame from these URLs.
Yeah.
So if it's somewhere else, it's someone trying to make our site appear on their site or something like that. Or don't pull down Flash from any URL except for this one, so that people can't embed JavaScript or Flash exploits into your website somehow.
This is a good idea.
Yeah. They also have the X-frame options, which basically says don't allow this website to be put in a frame by somebody else's website. Right? Google puts this on their stuff so that people can't put a frame up, like a full-page frame of Google, so that then they could trick people into logging into Google or something.
Right.
Steal their cookies and things like that. The X content type options, which allows them to do stuff to make the browser not do MIME sniffing and things like that. Right? Some browsers will do MIME sniffing and will ignore whatever the server said and do what they think the file is, which is annoying when you want the browser to do what you told it to do. So there's this extra header that tells it no sniffing. And then obviously there's the strict transport security, which we've talked about before, which is basically a header saying, for this amount of time, this website will always have HTTPS and never access it without HTTPS.
That seems like an obvious one.
Yeah, that one's been around for a while.
Yeah.
It's called HSTS. We've talked about it at length before. Also, they have this nice table where they actually show what versions of the browsers each of these headers are supported by. Like HSTS apparently is still not properly supported by Internet Explorer. Although it's, if you look 3 versions back and 3 versions ahead in Firefox and Chrome, it's already working. And doesn't work in the current Android, but it will work on Android 4.4 finally.
Okay. Come on,
iOS has partial support, apparently.
Starting with 7.0. Yeah, it seems like the desktop browsers are way ahead of the mobile browsers, with the exception of IE.
But if you look at like content security policy, iOS has had partial support since 5, full support since 6.
Okay. And IE's doing a little bit better. IE has partial support with the 10 and 11.
Yeah.
And Firefox and Chrome go way back.
Yeah.
Although they rev so often.
Going 3 versions back might not be enough for Firefox and Chrome.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was just
They might want to look at going 3
dozen.
Yeah, or something going back like 6 months and 1 year rather than 3 versions.
Oh my gosh, when I was my last client was doing this web development, and literally Chrome was revving so fast that we would try something one day and then we'd come back the next week and we'd have to try it again because it revved, and then Firefox started getting in on that game too.
Yep.
So now we got versions up the wazoo. All right, Alan, our last roundup link this week. And you're not the only one loving on ZFS this week. Lease Web Labs is giving ZFS a little love light, aren't they?
Yep. They just had an interesting article about ZFS. It was a little shorter than I thought it was when I put it in, but
they say it's one of the few enterprise-grade file systems with advanced storage features such as inline deduplication, inline compression, copy on write, and snapshotting. These features are handy in a variety of scenarios, from backups to virtual machine image storage. Yeah, absolutely.
And now that the native port to Linux is getting better, and about that, the OpenZFS just had their next office hours on Wednesday. So yesterday, and that was with the guy that's leading the ZFS on Linux project.
Oh, awesome.
So there were quite a few questions, and the video for that should be up on YouTube probably already, or if not by tomorrow, I imagine.
So OpenZFS office hours is the thing to search for.
Yep. It's open-zfs.org, and then there's a link to their office hours, and they'll have the previous 2 with Matt Aarons and George Wilson, and the current one, which actually had Brian, I forget his name, the Linux guy, and George Wilson and Matt Aarons were both there as well. And I guess if you check on the recording, for the first couple of minutes, I'm there. But then I had to go get ready for my own show.
Oh, is that what you were doing when I called you? Today? Yeah.
No.
Oh, okay.
This was...
Right. That was a while ago. Okay.
ZFS office hours was Wednesday morning, a couple hours before BSD now.
Yeah. Cool. All right, Alan, was there anything else we want to cover in this week's episode?
Nope.
All right, then, well, I'd like to invite everyone to join us live over at jblive.tv. Next week, we'll be starting at 11 a.m. Pacific. That blows my mind. Wow. And what time is that your time, Alan?
4 p.m. Eastern, 2100 UTC.
Pow! Over jblive.tv for the video and jblive.info for the audio, jupiterbroadcasting.com/calendar to get it converted in your local time and just to stay up to date on that kind of stuff. And don't forget, we want your feedback, so go over to jupiterbroadcasting.com and pop that contact link. All right, everyone. Well, thank you so much for tuning in this week's episode of TechSNAP. We'll see you right back here next week.